Yeah, what's going on, right? Your boy, doing the brand for you guys today. God damn it, I said that so fast. Welcome to my channel. I hope you're feeling good. So a few weeks ago or a month ago, I don't really remember. I feel like there's an echo in my room now because we're in process of getting ready to move. So there's less things in my room. So it might be like more of an echo than normal. Hopefully the mic doesn't pick it up. But anyways, that's not what it's about. But a few weeks ago or a month ago, I made a reaction video to a video about hate, anti-Asianness and the black community. And today I want to do another one of those kind of videos, another reaction video by Olivia Son Via. I probably butchered the hell out of that name, but I definitely apologize if I did. But she made a video called "How the Asian Model Minority," in quotes, perpetuates anti-blackness. So we're gonna watch that video today. It's from 8 months ago. I found out who this person was via foreign. He has a YouTuber who had her on. I think she might also been on FD as well. We're kind of rambling. I apologize. I'm all over the place right now. Yeah, so do all things upgrade, like video, comment, subscribe, and as always, when it comes to my reaction videos, go to the original video, watch the original video, and show the original creator some love. As well, so if you want to watch me play video games live, I do have a Twitch stream. Link to me in the description box below, as well as my link tree, which has links to my other YouTube channels, my support pages, socials, and things like that. So if you want to, follow me across the social media sphere entirely, check the description box below. This video content has been identified by the YouTube community as inappropriate or offensive to some audiences. Viewer discretion is advised. I understand what to proceed. Goddamn.
Here are 3 reasons why you should buy a new gaming PC from Build Redux. 1, we offer the best pricing on quality games.
Automatically skip to another video that I had queued up because YouTube's like, hey, you didn't say anything yet, so we're going to assume that you're not interested. This is a long video, so expect a long video, a long reaction. We do talk a lot. There's going to be a lot of pauses.
The Asian American community and the Black community have an unfortunate history of tension, which is why Foreign Man in a Foreign Land and I wanted to create companion pieces on this issue. Now, the Asian American community is extremely diverse, so I don't want to suggest that the experience is singular, and I hope to address some of that diversity in this video. For reference though, I am a second-generation Chinese Canadian, and I feel that there are general themes in the Asian American immigrant experience. While my video is about anti-Blackness in the Asian American community, Foreign's is about anti-Asianness in the Black community. Definitely go check out his video, which will be linked in the
basically giving you two sides of the coin. Instead of having just say a black guy talking about anti-Asianness in his own community, you also have someone who's part of the Asian community talking about the other one, anti-Blackness within her own community. So you don't really get that. Usually when you see these kind of videos, it's always like a one perspective kind of thing. It's never like a, hey, one person's doing one take, another person's doing another take, and then at some point they do a video together or a live stream together like they have before. Usually you just see like one person's perspective and you just go from there. In terms of I can't really say a lot about the anti-Blackness in the Asian community because I grew up in Detroit and there wasn't really like a lot of East Asians in Detroit. There was a lot of like South Asians because Detroit is near Dearborn, which has the highest Arab population in the United States. So just via that, like I was around like a lot of people who are like Southeast Asian descent or Middle Eastern, but never like East Asian. So I don't have like a lot of experience to be able to say like, oh, racism, I experienced this amount of racism from people who were of East Asian descent. I've had Asian friends, like some young. There's Leah. I'm not gonna name everyone. Just like, oh look, I got like that's not what we're going to do. But like, I don't experience racism from them. My high school friend, he's Filipino, and I've been around his family, particularly his mom, and some of the people who he know personally, and I've never experienced anything from them. But just because I don't experience anything doesn't mean it doesn't happen. That's like the thing about a lot of this is a lot of people will say, I didn't experience this, I didn't experience this, I didn't experience that. That doesn't mean anything. If one person doesn't experience anything, it doesn't erase the other people who do experience things.
The description box and put as a card here. In 1927, a group of
But also, I know we just paused, but just to touch on like the whole Asian phobia within the Black community, the video, I'll have it attached at the end of this video that I did before, involving, you know, that conversation. I talked about how there's definitely, like, from my experience, a lot of Asian jokes, a lot of Asian insults, just the Black community as a whole, and this is going to be a little, you know, one of them gut punchers. It has a lot of casual racism. And I say casual racism, I say that in the sense that Black people tend to think that they're not actually capable of being racist, that we're not capable of being racist. So we say and do like a lot of racial, you know, things. Like they're not necessarily hate driven, because generally when it comes to racism, the thought process there's something hate driven when it comes to racism. So with that casual racism, it's not hate driven. It's more like a humor driven kind of thing. And it's like, oh, we're just making fun and things like that. And it's all wrong. I don't do it, but I witnessed it in my life. You know, I'm 31 years old and I witnessed it from family, witnessed it from friends. You see it in TVs, you see it often in movies. You know, you even look at things like Rush Hour, for example. There's a lot of Asian jokes in Rush Hour, and you kind of view it as okay because it's Chris Tucker, he's a comedian, and Jackie Chan's there. So it's like, if it feels wrong, wouldn't Jackie tell him, you know, that they can't say that, right? But yeah, just generally in real life, not movies, there's always like, you know, some Asian jokes and racial jokes that you'll see from the Black community, and there's also like some stereotypes and things like that are driven by hatred that's also spoken as well.
Chinese American plaintiffs brought the case Gonlam v. Rice to the United States Supreme Court. At this time, there was legal segregation between white schools and colored schools. However, the Chinese Americans argued that they should not be in colored schools with the Black students, for white Americans justified their own separate school on the grounds that Black people posed a danger. And if white Americans were entitled to protection from the Black race, then they reasoned that it would be discriminatory to, quote, expose the yellow race to a danger that the dominant race recognizes.
Why are we the victims? My friends are good Christians. We've been through so much, and to go through this.
In 1991, a Korean liquor store owner shot and killed Latasha Harlins, a 15-year-old Black girl who the owner believed had stolen a bottle of orange juice. The Korean American could have been sentenced to 16 years in prison, but the judge placed her on probation.
What, 6 months probation? Yes. The people were pissed then.
A year later, 4 police officers who had severely beat Rodney King, a Black man, were acquitted of their charges. These 2 events sparked a 6-day period of widespread looting, property damage, and arson. Thousands of Korean American stores were hit. As Derek Chauvin knelt on George Floyd's neck, Tu Tao, a Hmong American police officer, argued with bystanders. While the crowd begged the police to stop, Tao responded, "He's talking so he can breathe." Before I say anything else, I think it's crucial that I de-radicalize the term white supremacy. I know this term may conjure up images of white extremists who march around with a Confederate flag, but I'm afraid this absolves a lot of people who aren't explicitly and obviously racist. White supremacy is anything that upholds white privilege through socioeconomic, legal, cultural, and materialist means. As such, people of color can contribute to white supremacy. The reasons, of course, are not the same, and that's what a lot of this video is going to explore. It can come from a mixture of internalized racism and buying into colonial neoliberal thinking for survival. But that doesn't mean a person of color can't uphold white supremacist beliefs. In fact, many white supremacist ways of thinking are normalized as natural, which is what allows some people of color to deploy it without intending to or being aware that that's what they're doing.
White supremacy renders itself invisible. It's mythological in its nature. We know it's there, but we're not allowed to see it, and we're discouraged to talk about it unless it does something egregious, like stand on a man's neck for 10 minutes, killing him, or storms the Capitol to try to do a coup. So what that often leaves is different minority groups all suffering under white supremacy, looking at each other.
This is how white supremacy successfully.
So like my interpretation of like that conversation on like how minority groups basically, you know, give strength to white supremacy would basically be like how any form of division strengthens white supremacy. And the white supremacy is kind of a blanket term. Like, I think we all kind of acknowledge it's kind of a blanket term, a generalization that can mean multiple different things. And you know, everyone's going to have like their own, when they hear that word in their brain, it's going to like trigger something different for them. But in this context, for this video, and when it comes to the context, whenever there's like a back and forth argument between two minority races, like be it, you know, blacks and Latinos, or Latinos and Asians, you know, Arabs and you know, any minority group, whenever there's, you know, any kind of bickering or fighting between minority groups, it kind of strengthens, you know, the white supremacy. And I don't think people never really notice that. It's like the more division you have, the worse things are. You know, it's not to like say that, you know, unity is like the ultimate problem solver, but the division doesn't help. You know, especially when it comes to like when bad things happen in the news involving any race, there's always people in the comment section that you'll see from another race who's basically supporting whatever that negative thing was. Like you'll see, let's take that the Ivy League school situation where there was a lot of discrimination towards Asian students. You look at articles for that, and you'll see people who were Hispanic or black who were making jokes about, you know, Asian people not being able to get into an Ivy League school and things like that. You'll see a lot of stuff similar to that. If you see like you know, any kind of crime happen involving someone Hispanic, you'll see, you know, blacks and Asians, you know, jump in and, you know, and have racial insults and also take part in joining in with let's say right leaning people who are white, who will be, you know, talking about, you know, building a wall and things like that. They'll support those ideologies because they agree with it. There's a lot of people who are minorities who do align with the right side of the spectrum, and they will have a lot of the similar beliefs and ideologies of people who we generally will call, you know, MAGA hat wearing or white supremacists or racists. So, you know, there's a lot of people who can factor into supporting white supremacy without even being white.
Pits racial minorities against one another. It is based in the colonial principle of divide and rule that makes minorities think they must be either above or below one another, and whiteness is the default.
I forgot which president said it, but I think the quote is, if you could convince the poorest white man that he is better than a black person, you can take every dollar, or you could take any penny from that white man, making him feel like despite his squander around him, at least I'm better than those black folks. And that distraction keeps him content. That distraction.
I know we're pausing very quickly again, but what he's saying reminded me of two comedians, Dave Chappelle and Chris Rock. Dave Chappelle has a bit in one of his Netflix specials where he talks about living in Ohio amongst poor white people. You know, he's like, they're the poorest of the poor, like they're like just very poor white people, and he's like, they don't hate anybody. Like he feels like, you know, they're nice to him, things like that. And he's like, he acknowledges that they do have, you know, some form of privilege just via their whiteness, but he's also like, they don't have the same privilege that he has because he's rich. And then there's Chris Rock. He has a special and bigger and blacker from the 90s where he's like, there's not a white person in this audience right now who would trade places with me, and I'm rich. So it's like, it kind of like goes into that, those are jokes, those aren't comedians. But at the same time, you do kind of feel like there's a sense of reality and truth to it, where it's like a poor white person wouldn't trade places with a rich black guy because, you know, sure, the money is nice, but you got to be a black male.
Stops him from wanting more out of his class.
The tension between the Asian American and the Black community seems to feel particularly salient because of how these two communities sit in the racial minority hierarchy. Asians are supposedly the top beneficiaries as the model minority, and Black folk are at the far opposite end.
I would love to walk into the workplace and everyone assume, oh, she's the smartest in the room, or she went to a UC, or whatever good stereotype that is associated with Asian people. I would love to have that.
This divide carries colonial perceptions of Asia versus Africa. Oriental Asia is harmony, mystical wisdom, spiritual but not without discipline. Hence, the Asian American trope is a docile, law-abiding citizen who works hard. Africa, on the other hand, was viewed by colonial explorers as uncivilized, savage, and in need of transformation by the whites. Hence, the African American trope is associated with things like crime, drugs, and a lower likelihood to succeed academically. But how do these stereotypes remain intact and even become internalized? We can examine this deeper by looking at an important characteristic of the Asian American community: its predominant immigrant population. Out of all the racial communities, the Asian American community holds the largest immigrant population and continues to be the fastest contributor to America's immigrant populace. In the 19th century, Chinese laborers were brought to America to do hard, grueling labor for white employers. They had awful working conditions, many facing severe health complications or dying, receiving little to no pay, and being seen as less than human because of their race. Other Asian and Pacific Islander groups were brought to America close afterwards for this same reason: exploited labor. They experienced intense racism from both white individuals and its institutions. Although Asian Americans today are stereotyped as honorary whites or the model minority, back then they were negatively perceived as being black or near black. There were many discriminatory measures taken to ensure their exclusion from white society. The United States Nationality Act of 1790 limited citizenship to free white persons and called people outside of this category aliens ineligible for citizenship, largely targeting Asian people who wanted to immigrate there. The racial discrimination in this law was not removed until 1952. The 1922 Ozawa case is another memorable instance in which a Japanese American was denied citizenship solely because of his race. The appellant is a person of the Japanese race, born in Japan. Including the period of his residence in Hawaii, the appellant had continuously resided in the United States for 20 years. He was a graduate at the Berkeley, California High School, had been nearly 3 years a student in the University of California, had educated his children in American schools, his family attended American churches, and he had maintained the use of the English language in his home. That he was well qualified by character and education for citizenship is conceded. The appellant in the case now under consideration, however, is clearly of a race which is not Caucasian, and therefore belong entirely outside the zone on the negative side. What this hints at, and what I'm definitely going to expand on in a moment, is how the socio-racial framework of America is a binary of white and black. The fact that the 1922 Ozawa case happened at all is because American law was confused as to where a person of Asian descent belonged in this white-black binary. The judge, Justice Sutherland, had said this: if naturalization is limited to aliens being free white persons, and to aliens of African nativity, and to persons of African descent, is one of the Japanese race born in Japan under any circumstances eligible to naturalization? We also see this white-black binary in effect in Gonglam v. Rice, the case I mentioned in the beginning of the video. The Chinese plaintiffs did not challenge the segregation between white and black people itself. Rather, their case was to argue that East Asians did not count as black. In order to advance the, quote, yellow race, they felt as though they needed to make a claim to whiteness. Philosopher Lewis Gordon describes it like this, quote, the anti-black world is conditioned by what we can here describe as two principles of value. 1. It is best to be white, but 2. Above all, it is worst to be black. When one fails to achieve the principle 1, it becomes vital to avoid embodying the group designated by principle 2. Framing race in this binary way of white and black is problematic in numerous ways. For one, it has created a lot of confusion for the Asian American identity. As an Asian American immigrant or children of immigrants, there was a lack of native culture, history, representation, and community, and so there was no solid Asian root for people to reference and identify with. Asian American is also such a broad umbrella term that really flattens the diversity of Asia. Chinese culture and history has many differences from Thai culture and history, which has many differences from Filipino culture and history, and so forth. But
I didn't want to like interrupt her too much right there, but her general comment right there when it comes to, you know, basically using the term Asian American as like a generalization or, you know, a blanket term for Asians. Like, you have to remember, like I said earlier in this video, that you have Southeast Asians, you have Middle East, which is a part of Asia. So if you think about, you know, what someone from India looks like, what someone from Japan looks like, you throw, they're all Asian, but like, you wouldn't really call someone who's of Southeast Asian descent, someone who's from Pakistan or from India, you wouldn't really call them Asian American. You would just call them Indian American or, you know, Pakistani American. Like, but generally, because, you know, this goes back to the visual racism that America has when it comes to like, oh, you look like this, so therefore I'm going to call you blank American instead of just American or Canadian or whatever. And even when it comes down to, you know, like East Asia, you know, there's not just China, there's not just Japan, there's not just South and North Korea, there's also Mongolia, there's also Cambodia, there's also Laos, there's also Vietnamese, there's also Thailand. Like, there's all these other countries who get ignored and kind of just get put as one of those three major blanket terms of, you know, Chinese, Japanese, or Korean. And if they don't want to call you either of those three, they just call you Asian American, because they don't want to sound ignorant. So someone doesn't want to sound ignorant, they see your complexion, because again, we live in a world of labels. If they don't want to be ignorant, say that you're, and like, hey, are you Chinese or are you Japanese and things like that, they'll just go Asian American, even though they're still, you know, Indians and Pakistanis and, you know, etc., who are also still technically Asian. And then also you still have those other, you know, Asian countries who kind of get ignored when it comes to, you know, the racial backgrounds. And even when it comes to like a cultural standpoint, if you have a certain look about you, people will ask you of your interest just via the way you look. Like, oh, this person they look East Asian, do you like anime? And it's like, are you assuming they like anime because you're just curious, or because they're East Asian and so potentially they're into anime? Or do you like K-dramas, or are you a fan of Blackpink or 21 or BTS? Like, it's associating your visual appearance with what's popular from just that portion of the world, even if you're not even from where where those popular things come from, if that makes any sense.
America, these sneaky little colonizers, mushed the largest continent in the world into a single racial group,
Asian American.
so that defining people under white supremacy would be easier. The more people you shove under one group, the more people you can subjugate at a time. So when Asian immigrants entered this society that was very explicitly framed around black and white, it was easy to feel like a perpetual outsider. The book, The Myth of the Model Minority, contains tons of interviews from a diverse demographic of Asian Americans. And in one section, a Japanese American recalls being confused about where he landed during the legal segregation era. Quote, "I stopped at a McDonald's in Mississippi, and there were two lines, one for whites and the other for blacks. Well, coloreds. I stood there and decided to go in the colored line because there was nobody in it and I could get my food faster. When I got up to the counter, the guy told me, 'Hey, you can't use this line, get in that other line.' The line for whites was long, and I had gone about halfway up when this guy says, 'Hey, you can't be in this line, get in the other line.' I just stood there and thought, what am I? Without representation in this white-black binary, non-black people of color have to decide whether they are going to identify with whiteness or blackness. As we have seen so far, Asian Americans historically and largely continue to strive for whiteness because it's the default. I'll talk about this a lot more in the section on the model minority. But in recent decades, there have been aspects of blackness that have become cool and popular, such as hip-hop, rap, and streetwear. It has enticed some Asians to identify more with black.
Which, on that note, Foreign, who's been featured in this video, has a video that talks about basically, you know, how East Asia is kind of like consuming black culture. I'm not gonna get too much into it. Just watch Foreign's video on it, but you know, that little nugget that she popped out Reminds me of that video.
Particularly darker-skinned Asians who feel excluded by colorism in the Asian community. In Toronto, for example, there are neighborhoods that have historically been home to sizable Caribbean, African, and South Asian immigrant populations. Within these neighborhoods, South Asians have often tried to emulate an idea of blackness through an interest in hip-hop and using certain language and dressing in a certain manner. In a podcast episode I listened to, journalist Dhruva Balram talks about how, as an Indian Canadian, him and his Indian friends used to say the N-word all the time, and nobody thought it was wrong because they truly felt as though they were black. Because he grew up alongside other black people and he didn't have a South Asian identity to gravitate towards, he thought that using the N-word was a way to claim some proximity to blackness, one of the two racial identities available, as though he understood the black experience, which he now declares he obviously didn't. There are South Asian rappers like Nav, who has said the N-word in multiple songs. In Toronto, the term Torontomans refers to Drake wannabes, and it is primarily represented by black and brown folk. As Anupta Mistry describes it, in the absence of aspiration that reflected our own hybrid South Asian identities, we gravitated toward black culture and role models. Sometimes, fair-skinned East Asians will even try to emulate blackness as a sign of rebellion. Blackness is thought of as the antithesis to whiteness, and so, by using AAVE language or having hair like this, it's seen as cool and badass. But these identifications with blackness are not the same as identifying with whiteness. Many Asians who make claims to blackness adopt the clothing, the slang, the swagger, but when it comes to black issues like police brutality or the lingering effects of redlined communities, they become quiet.
When you have these non-black people that come to black culture seeking acceptance and offering gifts, we're like, oh, this is cool. Come on in. Let's hang around. Oh, look at you doing the thing. We do that. That's awesome. You know, you want to say the N-word? Okay, just this one time. And the thing that causes a problem is black people realize that we keep letting people in and like they're with us when it's convenient. And then when it's inconvenient, they're like, oh man, I don't know about these niggas over here.
Racism is so often talked about as a solely black and white issue, which can make Asian Americans feel as though it is not their issue to speak on. And it also makes it harder for Asians to identify when racism involves them. I know there are Asian Americans who believe that if there is racism, it only happens to black people initiated by white people. And so it doesn't involve us. This aversion to participating in the black struggle, or just being ignorant about it, means that identifying with blackness really is most of the time co-opting one culture for another's capital and cultural gain. It's about only adopting aspects of blackness that do not disturb a white supremacist system. In this way, even when a claim to blackness is made, it still operates under the rules of whiteness. So not only is there this search of how to fit into the white-black binary that really is limited by white supremacy, Asian American immigrants, as with many immigrants, came to America searching for a better life. They may have been facing political strife, poor living conditions, or war in their own homeland, and have heard of the American dream where anyone can build a better life for themselves. Though they felt like a foreign outsider, they had high hopes of a better life in this country. Thus, psychologically, assimilation often is an attractive solution. Racist nativism positioned Asianness as a threat to jobs in Western civility, so Asian Americans couldn't embrace their culture and racial identity and then expect to succeed. No, if the American dream was to be achieved, it was to be done through embracing whiteness, the dominating narrative of socioeconomic success, respect, and beauty.
Many of the city's new small businesses are the American dream of the foreign-born.
After generations of being forced to work in cruel working conditions, being treated as viruses or threats, being forced into concentration camps, educational and job achievements became a major survival response from the Asian American community. Because
that comment about concentration camps, a lot of Americans don't even know about that. A lot of Americans don't know that, especially during World War II, and after what happened with Pearl Harbor and whatnot, there was Japanese concentration camps. Like, it wasn't as, it was bad, but it wasn't like as like horrifying as like, you know, Auschwitz and places like that. But because the victor is who writes history. A lot of American schools don't teach you about Japanese concentration camps in the United States. A lot of people who are American don't even freaking know about that part of history. It's just like, if you tell them, hey, there was America had concentration camps, they put people of East Asian descent into, they thought they were part of the enemy side. People are like, huh? That really happened? You're bullshitting.
Academic achievement can seem like an objective measure of meritocracy. You might be a racial minority, but if you got an 100 on this test and that white kid got a 92, well, the test scores don't lie. You've beat the white kid. Racism dismantled. By becoming model citizens and students who would not question white-imposed ways, maybe we can thrive in an environment that hates us. Especially for parents who did not obtain the prosperity they had imagined, it is even more important to them that they see their children succeed. It's hard to separate from the old world, and that's why I push my children so hard. I want my children to be better than me, to do better than I did. My life here, it wasn't supposed to be like this. I wasn't supposed to come here and work so hard for this long. My husband came to get his PhD, not have a restaurant. I worked in that hot kitchen 3 days before my daughter was born and had to work 3 days after. I am a failure here. I have a bachelor's degree in math. I was a teacher before I came here. Now I am nothing. I did the best I could, but it wasn't supposed to be like this. Now I want to be.
I'm gonna pause right there. I was waiting for her to finish that off because even though it's just a reaction video, I don't want to be rude. What that segment reminded me of, and I learned things at a young age, which is why I have the brain that I have now, because I watched a lot of TV. Growing up in Detroit, and I don't want to make this too long of a thing. You basically kind of became one of two things when it came to being a kid. You were either the kid who stays in the house and kind of watches TV and plays video games, or you're the kid who hung out outside all the time. And eventually, as you get older and older and older, being someone who's outside a lot, you start to get more and more involved with the wrong crowd. As someone who was on the side of being in the house, I played outside from my grandmother's house a lot, and she had her own rule. She was like, don't go past this part of the street at all. My grandmother was a cop, so she knew what parts of the city was bad, what parts of the street even on were bad. So she's like, don't go past this particular house, and that's the rule. So I did play outside, but I didn't have a wide berth where I could play outside. But what I want to get to was that I watched a lot of TV shows, and one of the shows I'm watching was Boy Meets World. This episode of Boy Meets World where Eric drops out of school because he failed and he doesn't believe that he can have success. So he becomes a security guard, and when he becomes a security guard, his partner is of Southeast Asian, and so he's the security guard is going back to school. He doesn't feel like he should be a security guard. He's just doing it to make money, to make ends meet. Kind of like how in what she was reading, the husband, he was someone who was established in Asia. But in the United States, they didn't really care what his degrees and things like that were in other countries, so he had a restaurant. So in this episode of Women's World, the guy who's a security guard, Eric's friend, forgot his name, he's reading a book, and Eric is like, well, why are you reading that book? And he's like, well, in India, I was an engineer, but in the United States, they don't know that I was an engineer. I could tell them that, but there's no documents that show them I'm an engineer. So he has the book for the SATs or something like that. I forgot what book it was, and so he's pointing to the book, but this book will tell them I'm an engineer. So he's trying to even though he went through all the schooling in India to become an engineer, he's in the United States, he's going through schooling again to basically get that same degree, but here in another country. And a lot of people don't it's a TV show, but that's a real thing. A lot of people who come from other countries to the United States, they have to go to school. They have to go back to school to get the same degree you already got, so the United States government can view them as, okay, you are a teacher, you are a mathematician, you are an engineer, and things like that.
Clear. This drive to excel academically, to work hard, and to push their kids to do the same is not to prove the truth of the model minority stereotype. Not all Asians are naturally talented in math and science, or have some innate drive to work. Rather, a large portion cared about academic achievement.
So she made the joke point at herself that she's not good at math and science. Again, I'm going to use a friend as reference. My friend Mikey, someone I went to high school with. he often makes fun of himself by calling himself a dumb Asian. He's not dumb, but he makes as a joke. He says it because he was like never good at the stereotypical, you know, subjects that people of Asian descent should be good at. So he'll make fun of himself in that way. And it is a weird blanket thing where we just assume because TV tells us that this minority is good at this and this minority is good at that, and they can't be good at anything else other than this particular thing, and everyone is good at it.
Because they saw it as necessary to escaping discrimination. But as hard as they tried, Asian Americans weren't really perceived as a success story until the 1965 Immigration and Nationality Act was passed. This act removed the racial quota for Asian immigrants, which, by the way, was a direct result of the civil rights movement, so we can thank the Black community for that. This is when the Asian American immigrant population really started to shift from poor, skill-based laborers to middle and upper-class Asians with higher education and specialized qualifications. The American government was very selective about who they let in, so, unsurprisingly, this new wave of Asian immigrants had a greater advantage than previous Asian immigrants. Suddenly, Asians were no longer considered Black or near Black. Their ability to get into good schools and obtain well-paying jobs granted them honorary white status. Asians became the model minority. I mean, look at how everyone in that group has succeeded. The Chinese, the Koreans, the Japanese, they're living proof that systemic racism is a thing of the past. If you ask me, they have it better than whites. I mean, in my high school, the only kid to get into Harvard was Asian. Oh, by the way, 2 blocks down, there's a lovely nail shop run by this Vietnamese family. The Vietnamese shops always do everything for so much cheaper. Just be careful though. The neighborhood is kinda sketchy. It always smells like smoke and there's like homeless people everywhere. Ugh, why can't they be like the Asians?
They're brainiacs, the kids who get top marks at school and university. And you can't help but notice that many of them are Asian. Why is that? Are they naturally smarter, or are they pushed by their parents?
When we hear the word Asian, America has done a great job at erasing 90% of the Asian American population from our mind. Asian has become synonymous with Chinese, Korean, and Japanese, because Asian is supposed to equal the model minority, the racial minority that makes a lot of money, lives in good neighborhoods, and does well in school. They make white people feel comfortable, because they don't complain about supposed oppression, and they accept the Western way of life. And admittedly, many Asian Americans themselves buy into the model minority myth. I certainly did when I was younger. I've had countless people joke about how my academic achievements are because of my Asianness, and I've watched enough movies that portray the Asian character as the nerd. But if it is just a myth, then why do so many Asian Americans believe in it and act as though it is true? There's lots of research to show that having shared memory of oppression can play a role in developing group solidarity. The Black community, having existed for generations in America as slaves, shares a collective memory of centuries of racism. However, with Asian Americans being comprised predominantly of immigrants, they lack a strong collective memory of discrimination. I know and have read about many Asian people who—
Not to cut her off, that also exists within the Black community when it comes to blackness. Like, the term being Black has nowadays become less about, you know, skin complexion and more about being an African descendant in America. So like a lot of people who are from the Caribbean islands or from South America, you know, which had 90% of slavery. When it comes to like the slave trade, 90% of all slaves, 90+%, it's actually more than that, 90+% percentage of all slaves during the slave trade went to South America and to the Caribbean islands. But because of, you know, the identity of being Black, being something that's associated with being a Black who's born in America, a lot of people who come from South America, who come from the Caribbean islands, people who are Jamaican, you know, Trinidadian, and, you know, just pick any Caribbean country, or Brazil, et cetera, Honduras and Colombia, they don't get— a lot of Black people don't want to consider them Black because they didn't go through what North American slaves went through. So they basically lose their Blackness, air quotes, via the fact that they're not natively born in America. And a lot of Caribbean and South American Black people will tell you the same thing. It was like, yeah, I think even Foreign, who was featured in this video, he has a video. He talks about how he went to a party with his girlfriend, who was, you know, a born in America black person, and Foreign being Jamaican. No, he's from the Bahamas. He's from the Bahamas. So he's Bahamian. So Foreign being Bahamian, his girlfriend being, you know, someone who was born in America. Foreign, you know, he was talking the same way everyone else was talking, and I think he said he used the N word, you know, with the GA on the end, not the ER. And like everyone kind of like just stopped and stared at him because they knew he was from the Bahamas, and they basically checked his blackness at that party, and it was like he's still black, but because he wasn't born in America, you know, there's like this hierarchy within America with American black people, where it's like you have to be born in America to actually have all of the things that come with blackness. If you're not born in America, then you know you get kind of like excluded from, you know, certain levels of blackness.
Did not think racism against Asians existed until they experienced a racist incident themselves. When I was a child, I was oblivious to racism. It did not occur to me that my desire to have blonde hair and blue eyes, or being embarrassed of my Chinese language and food, was because I had internalized whiteness as the standard to strive for. There was no discussion of racism at home or among Asian friends. A lack of collective memory means things were dealt with individually and internally. Awareness of racial discrimination was much harder to raise. My parents immigrated to Canada in 2001, so my family didn't know about the LA riots of 1992, and we didn't have Korean Canadian friends who could inform us about it. Middle school was where I first learned about historical discrimination against Chinese communities, and the experience was like having a disattached history lesson. I was a student taking notes about tragic events that happened to Chinese Canadians, the group I racially belonged to, but these Chinese people weren't my family. Like many Chinese immigrants that arrived post-1950s, my family wasn't part of North America's exploited Chinese laborers, and so I don't have a generational connection to them. It's very different from the way—
apologies to cut her off. To compare that to how things work in like black households, with black people, when it came to like how, you know, our ancestors, etc., you know, were treated in America, you know, that's kind of like ingrained into your being when you're a child. Like, you know, even though that wasn't your family who had to go through that, even though you're not related to Rosa Parks or not related to Martin Luther King and not related to, you know, insert black figure, your family kind of like made it seem like you were like, no, these are your people. You are part of them, regardless of, you know, any kind of blood relation or anything like that. That's still your people. Their suffering is also your suffering. And what she's saying is that essentially the suffering that Asian Americans have in the United States isn't part of her family, so therefore she was raised to not really look at it. You know, it's kind of like, oh, that's not us, so it's not our problem kind of situation. And that's not something that you have in the black community, at least not when I was growing up. When I was growing, like, it could be different now, but when I was growing up, you know, it was basically a we thing when it came to any kind of thing happening to black people.
Black Americans know that their personal ancestors were enslaved. The diversity of Asian Americans also makes building shared memories much more difficult because they have their own inner conflicts. For instance, during the World War II era, some Chinese and Korean people would wear stickers saying, "I'm Chinese" or "I'm Korean," so that they wouldn't get mistaken as Japanese, who were being brutalized in public. The educated Asian immigrants also tended to look down on the uneducated Asian immigrants. So without a strong collective memory of racism, nor group solidarity, the Asian American identity is defined primarily by ideas others impose onto them. The desire to integrate into society as foreigners can make them more vulnerable to accepting and internalizing racist, white supremacist ideas, if those ideas help them fit in. Because when you take away someone's ability to understand who they are and what their place is in the world, they will go at lengths to escape existential crisis. When Asian American immigrants cannot understand themselves in a socio-racial binary of white and black, and when being a foreigner further hinders their ability to define themselves, then anything that lessens the confused existential crisis is welcome.
Racism is not only this system to suppress people and oppress people, it's a culture that you can buy into. It's currency that you can use to access social capital with a particular majority
this is
group.
foreign, by the way.
And that's really important. So a lot of people sometimes, they aren't even racist. They're just being racist or casually racist so that they could get in with a particular group.
And the strongest, most prevalent narrative that has been pushed onto the Asian American community is the model minority narrative. So that's what exists in their collective memory. And so it feels true. And it definitely is a pleasant narrative to accept when the alternative is alienation as a foreigner and or being treated like the Black community. It is white supremacy's tactic of offering Asian Americans non-Blackness while still gatekeeping whiteness. Doesn't sound like a great deal, but that's the danger of white supremacy. It protects white privilege and tells everyone else that the best you can do is distance yourself from Blackness. Now, amidst all this, I think it's important to remember how desperate times can be for immigrants, especially back in the early and mid 1900s. They uprooted their entire lives to chase better conditions, and as a player, you don't get to set the rules. You just play the game in hopes of getting a good score. But being sympathetic toward the immigrant situation doesn't mean it's completely justified. Because by accepting this model minority narrative, the Asian American community has been used as a way to delegitimize Black struggles. It allows Asian people to acknowledge the plights of Black communities, but explain it as being caused by Black laziness and criminality. They can say, hey, we were immigrants, we know what it's like to struggle and to have to build our own success. But we worked hard, and if the Black community just worked as hard as us, their struggles would be solved too. What this narrative fails to recognize is the historical and social differences between these two communities. Their experiences in America are not analogous.
Black enterprise in America historically has been literally burned to the ground by white supremacist terrorism. The story of Tulsa, Oklahoma is the most famous one now. Like literally that was a well-known thing in Black academic circles and Black cultural circles that Tulsa.
And what people don't know, not to cut off FD, what people don't know, there was that was a lot. There was a lot of cities in America that got flooded, turned into like lakes. There's a lot of cities that got burned down. A lot of like, Black Wall Street. Like Tulsa, Oklahoma is like the one who gets called Black Wall Street, and is the most well-known example of having a city burned down and things like that. But there was more than just that. And basically what FD is trying to allude to is whenever Black people try to like rise up, we kind of got pushed back down. It's like, oh, we're having all this success, and then at a certain point there's some kind of like jealousy, racial jealousy, where it's like, okay, they're having too much success and we're not. Like even because like I think when it came to like Tulsa, a lot of it was, Tulsa was that area of Tulsa was getting so popular and massive and successful, while the white side of Tulsa was still kind of like, struggling and mostly poor. Then there's like some other drama that happened that kind of like just, was the ignition to what was already I don't know what the right word to use is, but it was already like a thin ice area, and it was just something that just broke that ice and caused the entire all the dominoes to fall in that situation.
Also, Black Wall Street was burned to the ground by white terrorist mobs. And when you get to a certain point, it's impossible to pass anything across communities, across families, because nobody has anything to pass along. Let alone just the absence of connection to our cultural heritage in Africa. I don't know what tribe my family's from. I don't know anything about what my ancestors may have been in Africa. I would have to pay Ancestry.com to kind of figure it out and then do a bunch of research. Black immigrants, Caribbean and African, they often have the same attitude towards Black Americans that Asian immigrant and second generation immigrants have, which is, why are you guys so this? Why are you guys so that? Why do you act this way? And then a lot of them, when they get there, Foreign gave his personal example. When he got to America, before he got to America, he had a relatively low opinion of Black Americans. He got here and kind of got to see and feel the nature of white supremacy firsthand. He was like, oh, I get it now.
Before I came to the States, I didn't think much about the fact that I was Black. But as soon as I came to the States, I was aware of my skin, I was aware of my size, I was aware that I, to some people, may very well just be a threat. They won't see my culture, they won't see the things that I love or the nuances of my personality, they will see a big black man with a beard.
However, many Asian Americans do not fit into this model minority narrative. It ignores the experience of tons of Asian Americans who immigrated into poorer neighborhoods, who didn't have pre-existing resources and qualifications to move them up the socioeconomic ladder. For example, many Hmong Americans came to America as impoverished refugees, which has drastically affected their community's ability to fit into the model minority stereotype. After the Vietnam War, the US resettled a lot of Southeast Asian refugees into poorly funded urban areas with crumbling infrastructure, where they had to live alongside the Black community. In these neighborhoods, the limited resources bred conflict between the Asian and Black communities who had to compete for those resources.
Why can't you guys be like Asian Americans? It's like, well, which ones are you talking about? Are you talking about Eastern Asians? You're talking about the Japanese? Because they're doing really well. You're talking about, Indians doing excellent. If you're talking about, Cambodians and Laotians and Filipino, not so much. But, that would require a critical race lens.
Ignoring the diversity of Asian American experience is a direct result of trying to attribute one grand narrative to a multitude of cultures. But for white America to tell the story of a model minority, they inevitably highlight those that are consistent with the story and sweep the rest under the rug. This allows white supremacy to treat Asians as a positive stereotype minority who is used as a scapegoat to deny the presence of white supremacy, but simultaneously maintain a barrier between Asianness and whiteness. I think of it as like a backhanded compliment. Just as how someone might say, "You're so pretty for an Asian," the model minority narrative says, "You're such a model citizen for a minority." One of the people I talked to was Cheyenne Lin, a YouTube creator who has a unique perspective. Although she is Chinese, she was adopted by a white family into a white community early on. She explains that even though these white people raised her and encouraged her to embrace her Chinese culture, they could not fully understand her experience as an Asian American.
And it was hard, again, being raised by people who wouldn't really understand what I was going through racially, and who would even make mean comments about my Asian American friends, and they expected me to kind of just laugh and go along with it. So sometimes they would see me as clearly Chinese American, but then sometimes they would want me to kind of enforce their preconceived notions of Korean American people, for example. And as a kid, growing up in a white community, I faced a lot of racism, and my family was really supportive when I was a kid, when I was going through those kind of microaggressions and bullying and stuff. But then as I became an adult, in college, when I would just talk about the same stuff that happened when I was a kid was still happening, they kind of shifted. When I got older, it was more you need to assert yourself more, stick up for yourself, stop being a victim, and all this stuff. And it was weird because as a kid, they supported me so much, but I think they didn't realize that having a kid that's a different race than you is they're going to be facing racism for their whole life, and it's a constant struggle, and you constantly have to have those conversations. But I think that they thought that was going to be left behind after I left grade school.
So long as white supremacy is the norm, Asian Americans are not going to be equals with whiteness. We need to recognize that the privileges we receive from white supremacy is at the expense of other racial minorities and are used to compare us to one another. These privileges aren't even that great at the end of the day. There is a huge mental health crisis in the Asian American community because we are expected to constantly excel academically. In the Myth of the Model Minority book, one respondent said she considered suicide at the age of 8 because she didn't get a gold star that day in class. Another daughter was shamed for her mental health problems because she didn't get accepted into any Ivy League schools. Another man insisted that Asian Americans did not face racism, yet he mentioned several times about how stressed he was about losing all the success he had achieved, because if he loses it, he would be reduced to a mere foreigner.
People kind of forget about the bad stereotypes and also think that the good stereotypes protect us from racial violence, which we know isn't true. I think the good stereotypes is another reason of why it makes it harder for us to speak out about racism, because they're well, what do you have to complain about?
These problems are paid little attention because being naturally smart is supposed to be a good stereotype. Yeah, it's good for pitting racial minorities against each other and denying anti-Asianness, but it's not so good for racial minorities ourselves. In November 2014, Peter Liang, an Asian American police officer, murdered an unarmed black man, Ika Gurley. Out of this situation, some Asian Americans formed a pro-Liang coalition and argued that Liang was being used as a distractor from the white-black conflict. Liang was a victim in their eyes. Because what happens if the black community wins and Liang is sentenced to prison? Well, they felt that the black community would basically accumulate more oppression points at the Asian American community's expense. In Killing Rage, Ending Racism, Bell Hooks talks about how white supremacy crafts an idea of institutional black power in society's imagination in order to make non-black people of color feel that the attention received by black issues is unfair. Black power can be theoretical, like critical race theory, public policy, like affirmative action, or cultural, like hip-hop, but this imagined black power insists that black people actually have some mythological power and respect in society. It's a way to diminish the severity of black oppression. It's like when people ask, why do black Americans complain about racism? We've literally had a black president, Obama, but we've never had an Asian president. Or when people deny the philosophical utility of critical race theory and say that schools teaching students about critical race theory.
Another example we can give on like, you know, that level of racism or racial deniance is like for athletes. Like you talk about institutional racism, people are like, there's no racism, LeBron James makes X millions of dollars. It's like being paid money doesn't equate to like racism being no longer a thing. There's rich black people. That doesn't mean racism isn't a thing. Like there's people who have that thought that like there's racial deniers who be like, if this exists, if these people have this, then that's proof that there is no racism. And it's usually people who don't experience racism who have that thought process. If you're someone who comes from a race that experienced racism, and basically this is like going to put everything into the other. So if you're people of color experience racism to some degree, while people who aren't a person of color tends not to. So in your brain just like, I don't see it, therefore it doesn't happen. I'm not a racist, therefore and I don't see my cousin do it, my mom doesn't do it. Like if you're someone who, you know, isn't a person of color and you think no one in your family's racist and none of your friends are racist, then you're like, well, it doesn't exist then. Because in my tunnel vision, my neural point of view, all I see is people who aren't racist, so therefore it doesn't exist. Ignoring anything on the outside, because all that's fake news. That's fake news, that's fake news, all that's fake news, that's not real. That's just the government and the media working together to put us against each other. My tunnel vision says there is no racism.
It's just institutions kissing up to black people, because apparently any specific attention given to the black community is proof of some secret privilege they have.
Critical race theory is bigoted, it is a lie, and it is every bit as racist as the Klansmen in white sheets.
I do not like that Ted Cruz man.
This narrative of institutional black power is a way for non-black people of color to justify their annoyance with black attention. It hides the fact that they are annoyed because they are vying for white attention, and they view the black community, who seems to get more attention for their issues, as the main competition, rather than seeing the attention black people receive.
And we do see that. We see that in like just like, even if it comes like something as simple as a movie. I remember there was an article, this is recent, like maybe a month or two ago, where this is about a movie cast. Which movie it was, like, but someone who was black was casted in the movie, and someone had commented, well, what about more Southeast Asian actors? And it's like basically like they're seeing black people get like these roles in Hollywood. They're like, well, what about people who look like me? I want people to look like that's real diversity. Like they're using like that as a springboard for like themselves, and kind of like viewing it how she described it as attention grabbing, and that black people are also trying to like get all the attention, give attention to like these people too. And it's like it's a weird thing, and like humanity itself is like, when it comes to all the racial division, when it comes to like all the, you know, the entire spectrum of racism and racial labels and otherisms is it opens your eyes a lot when you like watch videos like this, and you see how other people like think, or how they approach situations, and you read the comments. Like, my favorite thing about these kind of videos, other than the videos themselves, is reading the comments and seeing people basically like admit their own racial biases and their implicit bias, and you know, some casual racism that they themselves didn't know or acknowledge, because they watched a YouTube video that kind of like told them, hey, this is what you're doing, and they didn't know. Like I said before, at the beginning of this video, I was talking about how there's like a lot of casual racism within the Black community towards other races, and they don't notice that what they're doing is racist until someone tells them and checks them, like, yo, that's actually pretty racist. So you gotta check people sometimes.
As linked to the gravity of our situation and the intensity of our resistance, they want to make it a sign of white generosity and concern. Furthermore, as with any minority, Liang's racial identity was inherently political. We as minorities become representative of our groups. If Liang got convicted, there was fear that he would become a symbol of Asian Americans as a whole. It's just like how a Black person who commits a crime becomes a much more salient representative of their community than a white person who commits a crime. An Asian student who gets a below average grade becomes an Asian failure, whereas a white student who gets a below average grade doesn't get that same label. Under white supremacy, racial minorities have to always be careful about how their actions reflect onto their racial identity, because rights and privileges are treated like a zero-sum game. If one group gains some privileges or rights, then that's at another's expense. This competitive mindset encourages infighting and distrust. If we are going to build greater solidarity between the Black and Asian American communities, we need to discard this mindset. I know this is way easier said than done, but I also think there's been more solidarity between these two communities than we often give credit for. There are people like Grace Lee Boggs and Yuri Kochiyama who were active in the Black Power movement and civil rights movement, and worked to build Black and Asian solidarity. During the LA riots of 1992, the predominant narrative pushed by the media was that Korean immigrants were innocent bystanders whose stores were just unfortunate collateral in a white-Black conflict. What they largely left out were the Korean Americans who cooperated with Black communities, where they invested in local organizations and churches for racial injustice causes. COVID and the Atlanta...
A lot of that which also gets like missed and comes like that entire area. If there's a professional wrestler named Mia Yim is half Black and half Korean. She's from that area where those riots were happening. So, you know, of course her family is going to like, you know, take a side on who's associated with, not in terms of like Asian or Black, but like, you know, the white Black. Because a lot of these situations always become like a pick a side between white and Black people when it comes to any kind of racial division. That's literally what people tend to pick sides on. So like Mia Yim's family, like they're witnessing all of that, and they're taking part in like, you know, the pro-Black and pro-Asian, you know, unity essentially. And I kind of feel like that's kind of what the end goal should always be. And notice at the beginning of the video that unity is basically a utopian thought process. But me as someone who loves science fiction, I always love that idea of, you know, like say like Star Trek with the United Federation, or Mass Effect with the United, like just every country is just together. You know, like the Mass Effect, the hub of like the U.S. like the hub of the world government is in Vancouver, where it's like there is no more like separate, you know, entities of government. It's just one government essentially, and everyone, you know, the identity of race doesn't even exist in science fiction anymore. And that's kind of like why you also get those arguments with people who are racist who try to use like science fiction as like an example though. Like they were like, oh, they can't hire someone who's this race to be that race because that doesn't exist in that universe. Star Wars doesn't have the identity of African and Black, so therefore it doesn't matter. It's like they use it in that way, whereas I choose to use it in a way of like unity. Like the fact that they don't label Commander Shepard as, you know, he's the Black commander of the N7. Like if you make a Black Shepard, like those didn't exist in science fiction because it's more trying to like preach towards unity, not, you know, it doesn't exist because it this planet doesn't have the identity of Black, white, and whatever. Which again, you'll see that being used as an example in a negative way by people who, you know, kind of don't want to see in diversity in their things. Like look at like the Game of Thrones spinoff show. People were like, why is there a Black Targaryen? It's like, because skin color is kind of a genetic trait based on location. There could be a location within the world of Game of Thrones where there are Targaryens, and because they're exposed to the sunlight, they have darker skin. But people tend to ignore those kind of things because, you know, their bigotry is blinding them from common sense.
Spa shootings brought anti-Asian hate to the forefront of discussion. Many Asian Americans reported that for the first time, they sympathized with the Black community and really understood what it felt like to fear for their life because of their race. These are opportunities to recognize that Black and Asian communities are both disadvantaged by a white supremacist society. If we can see racial conflict not as between white and Black or Black and Asian, but between white and non-white, then we can feel a sense of belonging to the same group, and that sense of group membership is crucial to spurring collective action. Racism is like a river, and we are all in it. Some of us are up to our necks in the river of racism. Others are trying to wade to shore. But even if we make it to the banks of the river, we still have the river water on us. Thank you so much to FD and Cheyenne for sharing their opinions and helping me out with this video. If you didn't totally hate this video, you can like and subscribe. Leave a comment if you want as well. Thank you so much for watching. Let's keep talking, and I hope to hear from you soon. Bye!
So a great video. I know this is gonna be a long video, and a lot of y'all will be like, yo, can we get some shorter reaction videos? Because I don't know when this video's gonna go out, but I've been putting out some pretty long reactions lately. Not even just on this channel. This is my reaction channel where I'm trying to like avoid gaming things on it. But on my gaming channel, there's also been some reactions put up as well, where it's like, these are some long ass videos, my dude. But great video. You know, as I always say, show them some support, show them some love. Hit them with a like. Go watch the original video. It will be linked in the description box below. I'm going to peek the comments because, like I said, when I watch videos like this, I'm always interested in the comment section just to see, you know, how people are feeling, what people are saying. I want to hear other people's opinions because I'm just that kind of person. But I'm not going to have y'all read the comments with me, so I'm going to peek them on my own, and you can go watch her original video and look at the comments yourself. But with all of that said, it's a video. Thank you all for watching. I hope you all enjoyed. Do all these hours. Like the video, comment, subscribe. Check out her channel. Check out the original video in the description box below. I've been your boy Anubis. I'm out of here. Deuces.